The ex-wife stayed quiet in court until the judge asked one unexpected question. "You're asking for half of nothing, Evelyn," Evander whispered, his voice a velvet thread of malice as they passed the mahogany defense table. "I built the empire. I burned it down. You get the ashes." Evelyn didn't flinch. She adjusted her collar, meeting his arrogant gaze with chilling indifference. "Your Honor," Garrick interrupted, smoothing his bespoke charcoal suit, "my client is practically insolvent. This alimony request is nothing short of extortion." Judge Ambrose peered over his reading glasses, the courtroom falling dead silent. "Is that so? Then let us examine these ashes." Department 47 of the Los Angeles Superior Court was a testament to institutional fatigue. The air conditioning had surrendered weeks ago, leaving the cavernous room to bake in the relentless, dry heat of a brutal California October. Outside the tinted windows, the Santa Ana winds whipped through the palm trees, violently rustling the dry fronds, but not a single drop of rain had touched the city in months. The atmosphere was brittle, suffocating, and perfectly mirrored the fractured marriage currently being dissected before the bench. Evelyn sat at the petitioner's table, a statue carved from immaculate restraint. She wore a simple navy-tailored dress, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly over a blank legal pad. For the past 3 hours she had not spoken a single word. She had not wept, she had not scowled, and she had not reacted to the barrage of character assassinations launched across the aisle. Her silence was a palpable entity in the room, unnerving in its depth. Beside her sat Prescott, a family law attorney who looked decidedly out of place in this arena of high-stakes corporate divorce. With his rumpled tweed jacket, wire-rimmed glasses, and a habit of slowly chewing on the end of a silver pen, Prescott projected the aura of a retired history professor rather than a lethal litigator. He methodically arranged his files, seemingly unbothered by the predatory pacing of opposing counsel. Across the aisle, Evander was putting on the performance of a lifetime. The man who had once graced the cover of Forbes Tech as a visionary real estate and software mogul now sat with his shoulders slumped, his eyes cast downward in a manufactured display of defeat. He wore a high-end Brioni suit. Evelyn recognized the stitching, but she had watched him pause in the corridor outside to unbuckle his $60,000 Patek Philippe watch and slip it to his assistant, replacing it with a scuffed Casio. It was a masterclass in visual manipulation. Pacing the floor before the judge's bench was Garrick, Evander's attorney. Garrick was a partner at Stratton, Vane and Croft, a firm renowned for taking wealthy men and making their assets vanish into thin air during divorce proceedings. Garrick was a shark in a silk tie, his voice booming with rehearsed indignation. "Your Honor, what we have here is a tragic inability to accept reality," Garrick resonated, gesturing expansively toward Evelyn. "My client, Evander, was a victim of the global supply chain collapse and predatory lending practices by Horizon Vanguard Bank. His flagship enterprise, Auratech, was forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy 14 months ago. The assets have been liquidated, the capital is gone, and yet the petitioner sits here demanding a phantom fortune that simply no longer exists." Evelyn watched Garrick's mouth move, but her mind drifted back to the reality of the past 5 years. She remembered the late nights in their sprawling Calabasas estate, a home that was now supposedly foreclosed upon and owned by a mysterious Delaware holding company. She remembered Evander locking himself in his soundproofed home office, the glow of 6 monitors illuminating his face as he yelled at offshore developers and moved millions of dollars through digital wallets. Evander had not lost his fortune. He had merely buried it. "Mr. Garrick," Judge Ambrose interrupted. Ambrose was a man who looked exactly like the law, imposing, grey-haired, and possessed of a stare that could freeze boiling water. He had a reputation for an eidetic memory and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. Your opening brief states that Mr. Evander's current net worth is negative $300,000. Is that accurate? Tragically accurate, Your Honor, Garrick replied, pressing a hand to his chest. After the collapse of his firm, Evander was left personally guaranteeing several corporate loans. He currently resides in a modest leased apartment in Encino and drives a 2016 Honda Accord. He is rebuilding his life from scratch. To burden him with the $50,000 monthly spousal support the petitioner is requesting would be punitive and mathematically impossible. Prescott leaned over, his voice a barely audible murmur next to Evelyn's ear. He's laying it on thick. Let him dig. Evelyn offered a microscopic nod. She knew Evander's ego. He was a narcissist of the highest order. He hated pretending to be poor. It physically pained him to sit in a courtroom and allow the public record to reflect that he was a failure. But Evander loved winning more than he loved his pride, and destroying Evelyn, leaving her penniless after she discovered his serial infidelities, was his ultimate victory. The gallery behind them was sparse, populated only by a few bored law clerks and a freelance journalist looking for a scoop on the fallen tech bro. But in the very back row, obscured by the shadows of the double mahogany doors, sat Leopold. Leopold was a ghost of a man. Dressed in a muted beige suit, he held a battered leather satchel on his lap. He was a private forensic digital investigator, a man who specialized in tracing the untraceable. Evelyn had spent the last of her personal savings hiring him, pawning her grandmother's engagement ring to cover his exorbitant retainer. Evander thought he was fighting a standard divorce battle over bank accounts and real estate deeds. He didn't know that for the past 8 months, Evelyn and Leopold had been mapping the dark web of his digital existence. "We are prepared to call our first witness, Your Honor," Garrick announced, breaking the heavy silence. "I call Evander to the stand." Evelyn finally looked directly at her ex-husband as he stood. Evander caught her eye, and for a fraction of a second, the mask of the beaten man slipped. A cold, triumphant smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I win," the look said. "You get the ashes." Evelyn merely blinked, folding her hands tighter. Burn, she thought. Let it all burn. The swearing-in of Evander was a solemn affair. He placed his hand on a Bible that had seen decades of perjury, his voice dropping an octave to convey a deeply practiced humility as he swore to tell the truth. Taking his seat in the witness box, he adjusted the microphone, looking up at Judge Ambrose with the earnest eyes of a wounded saint. Garrick approached the podium, resting his hands on the polished wood. "Evander, let's walk the court through the timeline of the Auratech collapse. In November of 2024, what was the valuation of your company?" "We had just finished our Series C funding," Evander said, his voice carrying a slight, artificial tremor. "We were valued at roughly 40 million. I thought we were changing the world with our decentralized data platforms." "And then the market contraction hit?" Garrick prompted gently. "It was devastating," Evander sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Our primary investors, particularly Marcus Thorne at Chase Private Capital, pulled their commitments. Our supply chains for the proprietary hardware in Taiwan froze. Within 6 months, we were bleeding capital. I tried to save it. I took out personal loans against the Calabasas property, trying to make payroll. But the debt, it just consumed everything." For the next 45 minutes, Garrick led Evander through a meticulously constructed labyrinth of financial ruin. They submitted tax returns, Form 1040s, and K1s that painted a bleak picture of a man drowning in corporate liabilities. Evander testified about the painful decision to let his staff go, the foreclosure of his properties, and the humiliation of his current, supposedly impoverished lifestyle. "And your current income, Evander?" Garrick asked, wrapping up his direct examination. "I do freelance consulting when I can find it," Evander replied softly. "Mostly for small, local businesses. I make perhaps $4,000 a month. Barely enough to cover rent and basic utilities." "Thank you, Evander." "Your Honor, I pass the witness," Garrick said, taking his seat with a look of supreme satisfaction. He had painted a masterpiece. Evander was judgment-proof. Judge Ambrose turned his heavy gaze toward the petitioner's table. "Mr. Prescott, cross-examination?" Prescott stood up slowly, joints popping in the dry heat of the courtroom. He picked up a single sheet of paper and ambled toward the center of the room. He didn't possess Garrick's predatory swagger. He looked like a man who had misplaced his glasses, even though they were on his face. "Good morning, Evander," Prescott began, his tone remarkably conversational. "Good morning, Mr. Prescott," Evander replied politely, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of contempt for the older, seemingly incompetent lawyer. "I was looking through these bank statements from your personal Wells Fargo account," Prescott said, holding the paper at arm's length, squinting. "The one you use for your basic living expenses." "Yes? I see a lot of charges here for standard things. Groceries, gas. But I noticed something curious in the months leading up to the bankruptcy. You made several large transfers to an entity called Blue Horizon Management LLC. Can you tell us what that is?" Garrick stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. Those transfers occurred 2 years ago, well before the separation, and that LLC was a vendor for Aura Tech that went under." "I'll allow it for now, Mr. Garrick," Judge Ambrose rumbled. "But get to the point, Mr. Prescott." "It was a vendor," Evander answered smoothly. "They handled our offshore logistics. The money was a retainer that was lost when the market crashed." Prescott nodded slowly. "I see. Just a vendor. And it has no relation to the property in Dubai? The one purchased under a remarkably similar shell company name?" "Objection," Garrick barked, his voice echoing sharply. "Counsel is testifying and introducing unsubstantiated conjecture." "Sustained," Ambrose said sharply. "Mr. Prescott, unless you have a deed with Mr. Evander's name on it, move on." "My apologies, Your Honor," Prescott said mildly, retreating easily. He asked a few more mundane questions about car leases and utility bills, allowing Evander to confidently bat them away. In the gallery, Leopold made a tiny notation on his legal pad. He caught Prescott's eye and offered a microscopic nod. The trap was set. They had let Evander commit perjury on the stand, solidifying his lie about his technical incompetence and financial ruin. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor," Prescott said, returning to his seat. Evander stepped down from the stand, visibly relieved. He walked back to his table, shooting Evelyn another look of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He had done it. He had convinced the court he was broke. Evelyn felt the familiar sting of his gaslighting, the psychological weight that had kept her trapped in their marriage for years. Evander had a unique talent for warping reality until you questioned your own sanity. But today was different. Today, she wasn't relying on her own voice against his. "Does the defense rest?" Judge Ambrose asked. "We do, Your Honor," Garrick said confidently. "Very well. The court will take a brief 15-minute recess before the petitioner presents her case," Ambrose declared, banging his gavel. As the courtroom emptied, the oppressive dry heat seemed to settle even heavier over the room. Evander and Garrick walked out into the hallway, their voices low and celebratory. Evelyn remained seated. Prescott sat beside her, uncapping his silver pen. "He lied beautifully," Prescott murmured, not looking up from his notes. "He always does," Evelyn replied, her voice rough from disuse. It was the first time she had spoken all morning. But he forgot one thing. Prescott smiled, a thin, dangerous curve of the lips. He forgot that the internet is forever. When court resumed, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. The oppressive heat remained, but the shadows in the room had lengthened as the afternoon sun beat against the blinds. Judge Ambrose returned to the bench, his face an unreadable mask of judicial authority. He spent a long, agonizing 3 minutes silently reading through a thick stack of Evander's submitted financial affidavits. The silence stretched, pulling taut like a wire. Garrick shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his previous confidence waning slightly under the judge's intense scrutiny. Evander maintained his pose of polite exhaustion, but his foot began a rapid, nervous tapping beneath the mahogany table. Ambrose finally lowered the documents, taking off his reading glasses and placing them deliberately on the bench. He didn't look at Garrick, and he didn't look at Prescott. He looked directly at Evander. "Mr. Evander," Judge Ambrose began, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly register that commanded absolute attention. "Before we proceed with the petitioner's case, I have a point of clarification regarding your submitted schedule of assets and debts." Evander sat up straighter. "Of course, Your Honor." Ambrose picked up a single sheet of paper from the very bottom of the stack. "I am a man who appreciates thoroughness, Mr. Evander. Your counsel has provided over 500 pages of financial ruin. It is a very complete picture of a man who claims to have nothing." "Thank you, Your Honor," Garrick interjected smoothly. Ambrose raised a single finger, silencing the lawyer instantly. "However, I was reviewing your personal Chase checking account. The one you stated is used solely for basic living expenses like groceries and your Encino apartment rent." "Yes, Your Honor," Evander said, a slight hesitation bleeding into his voice. "I see a recurring monthly expense here," Ambrose continued, his eyes locking onto Evander like a predator. "A charge of $49.99, processed on the 1st of every month, paid to a company called Apex Renderings, LLC. Can you explain this expense?" Garrick frowned, clearly confused. It was a $50 charge. In a multi-million-dollar divorce, it was less than a rounding error. "Your Honor, respectfully, it's a nominal charge, likely a forgotten software subscription. I asked your client, Counselor," Ambrose snapped, his voice echoing like a gunshot in the hot, dry room. "Mr. Evander, in the context of your stated insolvency, where every penny is supposedly allocated to survival, why are you maintaining a high-end, cloud-based video rendering server subscription?" The courtroom froze. Evander's face went completely slack. The color drained from his cheeks, replaced by an ashen, sickly pallor. The foot tapping beneath the table stopped abruptly. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff in the dark. It's just an old backup drive, Your Honor," Evander stammered, his polished demeanor shattering in an instant. "For family photos." "Family photos," Ambrose repeated flatly, looking at the document. "A robust enterprise-level rendering server, utilized primarily by high-output digital animation studios for family photos." "Your Honor, I fail to see the relevance of a $50 charge," Garrick protested, standing up, panic finally edging into his voice. He didn't know what this was, but he knew his client was suddenly terrified. Before Ambrose could respond, the silence at the petitioner's table was broken. Evelyn stood up. She didn't wait for Prescott to introduce her. She didn't wait to be called to the stand. After hours of absolute, stony silence, her voice rang out, clear, cold, and devastatingly precise. "It's not for photos, Your Honor," Evelyn said. Every eye in the room snapped to her. Evander gripped the edge of his table, his knuckles turning white. "Evelyn, shut up!" he hissed, dropping the facade completely. Judge Ambrose banged his gavel. "Silence, Mr. Evander. Mrs. Evelyn, you are not under oath, but you may address the court regarding this document." Evelyn stepped out from behind the table. She looked directly at her ex-husband, her eyes blazing with the cold fire of a woman who had spent months meticulously digging her own way out of a grave he had dug for her. "He doesn't use it for photos," Evelyn stated, her voice steady. "He uses it to render high-definition video files, specifically 4K resolution videos for a YouTube channel known as the Crypto Oracle." Garrick stared blankly. "A YouTube channel? Your Honor, this is absurd. A YouTube channel," Evelyn continued over him, her voice rising slightly to fill the room, "that currently boasts 8.5 million subscribers. A channel that generates an estimated $300,000 a month in ad revenue, sponsorships, and private Discord community fees. A channel owned by a Delaware LLC, registered to a man named Elias Thorne, which is the middle name of Evander's late grandfather." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully constructed empire of lies collapsing in on itself. Judge Ambrose looked from Evelyn to the panicked Garrick, and finally to Evander, who was now sweating profusely in the stifling heat of the courtroom. "Mr. Prescott," Judge Ambrose said, his voice dangerously soft, "do you have evidence to substantiate this extraordinary claim?" Prescott stood up, finally removing the pen from his mouth. He turned toward the back of the courtroom. "We do, Your Honor. I'd like to call our next witness, Mr. Leopold Vance, forensic digital investigator." In the back of the room, Leopold stood up, his battered leather satchel in hand. He walked down the aisle, the sound of his footsteps echoing like a death knell in the silent court. Evander watched him approach, the realization finally hitting him. The karma he thought he had outrun wasn't coming in the form of a bank auditor or a real estate crash. It was coming from the very digital empire he had built in the shadows to hide his wealth. Evelyn sat back down, folding her hands neatly over her legal pad. The silence in the room belonged to her now. Leopold Vance did not walk to the witness stand. He seemed to materialize within it, a quiet, unassuming phantom settling into the polished oak enclosure. He set his battered leather satchel carefully on the floor, adjusting his muted beige suit jacket. In a room built on aggressive posturing and billion-dollar egos, Leopold's profound lack of presence was his greatest weapon. He looked like an underpaid high school substitute teacher. But Evelyn knew the truth. Leopold was a digital bloodhound, a veteran of financial cyberforensics who had previously contracted for the SEC to untangle the FTX collapse. "State your name and occupation for the record," the bailiff instructed, holding out the worn Bible. "Leopold Vance, independent forensic digital investigator, certified by the Global Information Assurance Certification in Cybersecurity and Financial Trace Analytics," he replied, his voice a dry, papery rasp that barely reached the microphone. Prescott stood, running a hand through his thinning hair. He approached the stand with the casual gait of a man asking for directions, entirely devoid of Garrick's predatory swagger. "Mr. Vance, thank you for being here. You were retained by my client, Evelyn, 8 months ago. What was the scope of your investigation?" "To conduct a comprehensive audit of Mr. Evander's digital footprint, network traffic, and unlisted asset portfolios, specifically focusing on anomalies between his stated income and his bandwidth consumption," Leopold answered smoothly, retrieving a thick, bound dossier from his satchel. "Bandwidth consumption?" Prescott asked, leaning against the petitioner's table. "That seems an odd place to start looking for hidden millions." "People lie, Mr. Prescott. Bank statements can be forged, shell companies can be obfuscated by Delaware proxy laws, and cash can be buried," Leopold explained, turning to look directly at Judge Ambrose. But data does not lie. High-level financial concealment in the modern era requires infrastructure. It requires encrypted communication, massive data storage, and server space. I didn't look for Evander's money. I looked for his electricity and his internet usage. At the defense table, Evander's posture had completely collapsed. The manufactured slump of a defeated man had been replaced by the rigid, vibrating tension of a cornered animal. Garrick, his attorney, was staring at Leopold with a mixture of confusion and rising dread. "Let's go back to the $50 charge His Honor noticed," Prescott prompted. "Apex Renderings, LLC. What did your investigation reveal about that entity?" Leopold opened his dossier. Apex Renderings is a front. It is a shell corporation registered in Wyoming, routing payments to a massive, decentralized server farm located in a data center outside of Reno, Nevada. By subpoenaing the ISP records tied to Mr. Evander's seemingly modest Encino apartment, I was able to cross-reference the packet routing. Mr. Evander was utilizing a commercial-grade fiber optic line, uploading roughly 4 terabytes of encrypted data every week. Judge Ambrose leaned forward, his massive hands clasped on the bench. The dry, suffocating heat of the courtroom seemed to press inward, the silence absolute save for the hum of the struggling air conditioning unit. 4 terabytes? Of what, Mr. Vance? Video files, Your Honor. Specifically, highly produced, 4K resolution financial analysis videos, Leopold said calmly. I utilized a proprietary software suite, similar to the Chainalysis reactor used by federal agencies to track the destination of these uploads. They were being funneled through a virtual private network, a NordVPN server based in Switzerland, directly to YouTube's creator studio. "Objection!" Garrick shouted, leaping to his feet, his silk tie swinging wildly. "Your Honor, this is a flagrant violation of privacy. Opposing counsel is using illegal cyberstalking to fabricate a narrative that has no bearing on my client's bankruptcy." "Overruled, Mr. Garrick," Ambrose snapped, his voice a low thunderclap. "The petitioner has submitted this expert witness legally. If your client is uploading terabytes of data while claiming he can barely afford groceries, the court has a vested interest in knowing why. Sit down." Garrick slowly sank into his chair, the color draining from his face as he looked at Evander. He leaned in, covering his microphone. "What did you do?" Garrick hissed, his voice barely audible over the stifling air of the room. Evander didn't answer. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Leopold. "Mr. Vance," Prescott continued, unbothered by the interruption, "where did these videos go?" "They are the sole content of a YouTube channel called The Crypto Oracle," Leopold stated, flipping a page in his dossier. "The channel was created exactly 2 weeks before Mr. Evander filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for Aura Tech. It features an anonymous host who provides highly speculative, often aggressive investment advice regarding decentralized finance, altcoins, and NFT markets." "And how successful is this channel?" Prescott asked. "Immensely," Leopold replied. "As of this morning, it has 8.5 million subscribers. However, the YouTube ad revenue, while substantial, is merely the tip of the iceberg. The Oracle runs a tiered, private Discord community. Subscribers pay up to $200 a month for exclusive trade signals. Furthermore, the Oracle frequently accepts undisclosed sponsorships from newly minted cryptocurrency tokens." "Have you been able to quantify the income generated by this hidden enterprise?" Judge Ambrose asked, his pen poised over his notepad. Leopold adjusted his glasses. "Yes, Your Honor. The fiat currency, the ad revenue and Discord subscriptions, is routed through a payment processor to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under the name Elias Thorne. The crypto assets, The sponsorships and trading profits are funneled into a series of cold storage hardware wallets, specifically Ledger Nano X devices. By tracking the blockchain ledger, which is public, I was able to trace the wallets definitively tied to the Oracle's promotional wallets. Leopold paused, letting the heavy, dry air settle in the courtroom. He looked at Evander, offering no malice, only the cold, hard weight of undeniable truth. In the 14 months since Mr. Evander swore under oath that he was utterly bankrupt, Leopold concluded, his voice unwavering, he has amassed an estimated $22 million in liquid capital and digital assets through the crypto Oracle channel. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a bomb having gone off, leaving a vacuum in its wake. Judge Ambrose broke the silence, his gavel hitting the sound block with a sharp, echoing crack. Mr. Prescott, you are accusing the respondent of defrauding this court to the tune of $22 million. That is not a civil matter. That is federal perjury and criminal concealment. You had better have irrefutable proof that Evander and this Oracle are the same person. We do, Your Honor, Prescott said. With the court's permission, I have coordinated with the bailiff and the IT department to bring a monitor into the courtroom. We would like to enter Petitioner's Exhibit 47 into evidence, a video published by the Crypto Oracle 3 days ago. Ambrose nodded grimly. Proceed. A heavy, rolling AV cart was pushed into the center of the courtroom by a sweating clerk. The screen flickered to life, the bright glare of the monitor cutting through the dusty, golden afternoon light, filtering through the blinds. Evelyn watched the screen, her heart beating a steady, uncompromising rhythm against her ribs. She remembered the day she found out. It wasn't a grand, cinematic discovery. She had simply been trying to clear out some old boxes in the garage of her rented townhouse, looking for tax documents, when she found one of Evander's discarded Apple iPads. It was dead, but she had plugged it in to wipe it before selling it. When it booted up, a notification had flashed across the lock screen. A 2-factor authentication code for a Kraken cryptocurrency exchange account. She could have ignored it. She could have accepted the narrative Evander had aggressively sold to her, to their friends, and to the world. That he was a broken man, ruined by the market. But Evelyn had lived with Evander for 10 years. She knew the shape of his pride. He was incapable of true failure. If he had fallen, it was only because he had engineered a softer, hidden landing elsewhere. That single notification had sparked a fire of responsibility within her. She wasn't just fighting for her fair share of the marital assets. She was fighting to expose a pathological liar who was currently using his newly minted digital pulpit to fleece millions of naive investors. She had pawned her jewelry, cashed out her meager retirement, and hired Leopold. She had bet her entire future on the truth. On the screen, the video began to play. The production value was astonishing. The background was a sleek, neon-drenched digital rendering of a futuristic cityscape. In the center of the screen sat the Crypto Oracle. The figure was dressed in a tailored, shadowed suit, his face completely obscured by a highly reflective, geometric digital mask that pulsed with blue LED light. "Listen to me, Vanguard," the Oracle's voice boomed through the courtroom speakers. The voice was heavily modulated, pitched down into a resonant, metallic baritone that sounded like a supercomputer giving a sermon. The institutional elite want you to believe the market is dead. They want you terrified. They want you selling your bags so they can scoop up the generational wealth at a discount. But we see through the matrix. Today we're looking at Solstice coin. It's a low-cap gem, and I'm telling you right now, this is the exit velocity you've been waiting for. Garrick scoffed, waving a hand at the screen. "Your Honor, this is a cartoon character. a voice-modulated internet avatar. To claim this is my client is an insult to the court's intelligence. Prescott pressed pause on the remote. Mr. Vance, would you care to explain how we can identify the man behind the mask? Leopold leaned forward into the microphone. The visual masking is flawless, but the physical environment is not entirely digital. The subject is using a green screen. If you look closely at the reflective surface of the mask in the video, specifically at the timestamp of 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the rendering software struggles to track the reflection of the ambient light in the room. Prescott advanced the video to the precise timestamp and zoomed in on the oracle's masked face. The reflection, Leopold continued, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room, shows a distinct architectural feature. A custom, soundproofed acoustic foam pattern cut into the shape of a repeating hexagonal grid. Furthermore, in the bottom left corner of the reflection, there is a very specific, custom-built humidor. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the memory wash over her. Mrs. Evelyn, Prescott said softly, turning to her. Are you familiar with that room? Evelyn stood up. She didn't look at Evander. She looked directly at the judge. Yes, Your Honor. That is the basement office of our former home in Calabasas. The acoustic foam was custom ordered from a studio supplier in Germany, and the humidor is a bespoke piece Evander had commissioned by a local artisan in Los Angeles. It has his initials, EV, inlaid in mother-of-pearl on the lid. A circumstantial visual match, Garrick argued desperately, though sweat was now visibly pouring down his temples. The home was foreclosed upon. Anyone could be renting it. Which brings us to the audio, Leopold interrupted smoothly, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. Voice modulation lowers the pitch and alters the timbre, but it cannot change the fundamental cadence, breath patterns, and unique phonetic spacing of a human speaker. It is essentially a biometric fingerprint. Leopold plugged the USB into a laptop connected to the AV card. I extracted the raw audio from 50 hours of the Crypto Oracle's videos. I then ran it through an audio forensic unmasking algorithm, stripping away the digital distortion and pitch shifting, returning the audio to its native frequency. The algorithm I used is the same one deployed by the FBI's Operational Technology Division. Leopold hit a key on his laptop. The metallic, booming voice of the Oracle was gone. The courtroom was suddenly filled with a clear, sharp, unedited audio track. The institutional elite want you to believe the market is dead. They want you terrified. They want you selling your bags so they can scoop up the generational wealth at a discount. It was Evander, unmistakable, arrogant, and perfectly clear. Evander let out a ragged, choked gasp, his hands flying to his face. The illusion was shattered. The meticulously crafted defense, the hundreds of pages of fake financial ruin, the pity he had tried to weaponize against his wife. It all dissolved in the dry, unyielding heat of Department 47. I have also prepared a waveform comparison chart, Your Honor, Leopold added quietly. It maps the unmasked Oracle audio directly against the deposition audio Mr. Evander provided to this court 3 months ago. It is a 99.8% biometric match. Judge Ambrose stared at the screen, then slowly turned his gaze to Evander. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, despite the broken air conditioning. The judge's eyes were flat, dark, and devoid of any mercy. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. The revelation hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. Garrick was the first to break the paralysis. He stood up, slowly backing away from the defense table as if Evander had suddenly contracted a highly contagious disease. Garrick was a shark, but he was a shark who valued his license to practice law. "Your Honor," Garrick said, his voice trembling slightly. He wasn't performing anymore. He was terrified. I need to request a brief recess. I need to confer with my client. I was entirely unaware." "You will stay exactly where you are, Counselor," Ambrose barked, pointing a lethal finger at Garrick. "If you so much as twitch toward the door, I will hold you in contempt. Your client just committed perjury of the highest order in my courtroom, and I am currently deciding whether you are an unwitting dupe or a co-conspirator. I swear to you, Your Honor, I had no knowledge of these assets," Garrick pleaded, his bespoke charcoal suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too big for him. Evander finally snapped. The pressure of the trap, the humiliation of being outsmarted by the wife he had so thoroughly dismissed, triggered a wild, reckless panic. "It's a character!" Evander shouted, standing up, his chair scraping violently against the wood floor. "It's performance art. The money isn't real. It's tied up in volatile liquidity pools. You can't tax a YouTube persona." "You aren't being taxed, Mr. Evander. You are being divorced," Ambrose said coldly. "And you lied on federal financial affidavits." In the back row of the gallery, Sarah Jensen, the freelance journalist, was practically vibrating. She had come to write a boring, 500-word piece on the sad downfall of a local tech bro. Instead, she had just been handed the scoop of the decade. The crypto oracle, the anonymous god of decentralized finance, the man who moved markets with a single video, was a disgraced, bankrupt CEO trying to hide his millions from his wife. She pulled out her phone, ignoring the courtroom rules against electronics, and frantically began typing out a post on X, tagging all the major financial news outlets. Breaking. Massive courtroom reveal in LA. The anonymous host of The Crypto Oracle, 8.5 million subscribers, has just been unmasked in court as Auratech CEO Evander. Expert testimony proves he hid $22 million in assets during his bankruptcy and divorce. More to come. She hit send. It was the spark that would burn Evander's digital empire to the ground. Down at the front of the room, Leopold wasn't finished. He looked at Evander, who was currently hyperventilating, his hands planted flat on the mahogany table. "There is one final matter regarding the origin of these funds, Your Honor," Leopold said, his voice cutting through Evander's panicked breathing. "The initial seed capital used to purchase the rendering servers, the marketing bots, and the initial crypto liquidity to start the Oracle channel didn't come out of thin air." Evander froze, his eyes widening in absolute horror. "No, shut up! Don't!" "Mr. Evander," Ambrose warned, his voice dangerously soft, "if you speak again without being spoken to, I will have the bailiff place you in handcuffs." Ambrose nodded to Leopold. "Continue, Mr. Vance. Where did the seed money come from?" "It came from a joint marital savings account held at Bank of America," Leopold stated, holding up a final bank statement. "An account that Mrs. Evelyn believed had been drained by the Auratech collapse. Mr. Evander illegally siphoned $400,000 of communal marital funds, tumbled the money through a cryptocurrency mixer called Tornado Cash to obscure the trail and used it to build his new empire." Evelyn felt a cold, hard knot of anger finally release in her chest. He hadn't just hidden his new money from her. He had stolen their money to build it. Her redemptive arc was complete. She had not only survived his psychological warfare, she had surgically dismantled him. She had taken responsibility for her own naivety, investigated the truth, and laid it bare for the world to see. Suddenly, a loud, obnoxious buzzing sound erupted from the defense table. It was Evander's scuffed Casio watch, or rather, the burner smartphone hidden inside his suit jacket pocket that he had neglected to silence. The buzzing didn't stop. It grew frantic, a continuous, panicked vibration. Judge Ambrose narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Evander, surrender the phone to the bailiff." Evander's hands were shaking so badly he could barely reach into his pocket. He pulled out a sleek iPhone, the screen lit up like a Christmas tree. The bailiff stepped forward, snatching the phone from Evander's trembling grip, and handed it up to the bench. Judge Ambrose looked at the screen. A grim, terrifying smile touched the corner of his lips. "It seems, Mr. Evander," Ambrose noted dryly, "that the internet is indeed very fast. You have 74 missed messages on an application called Discord, and your Twitter notifications are quite active." Evander slumped back into his chair, utterly broken. The karma he had engineered had arrived with ruthless efficiency. Out in the real world, beyond the stifling heat of the courtroom, Sarah Jensen's tweet had gone viral. Within minutes, the massive, rabid community of the crypto oracle had realized they were being led by a bankrupt fraud. The people Evander had pumped and dumped, the naive investors he had squeezed for subscription fees while pretending to be an infallible financial god, were turning on him. His Discord moderators were quitting in real time. His sponsors were drafting breach of contract lawsuits. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., the Securities and Exchange Commission was undoubtedly warming up a very large, very serious investigation into market manipulation and wire fraud. Evander had tried to leave Evelyn with the ashes of his first empire. He had never considered that she would be the one to strike the match that burned his second empire to the ground. Judge Ambrose did not shout. He did not need to. The sheer, crushing gravity of his silence was enough to strip the remaining oxygen from the sweltering, dry air of Department 47. He stared at the glowing screen of Evander's confiscated iPhone, watching the notifications cascade like a digital waterfall. Each buzz was another investor waking up to the fraud, another thread unraveling the tapestry of Evander's second, secret life. Ambrose slowly handed the phone back to the bailiff, his face set in lines of granite. He picked up his pen and began to write methodically on his legal pad. "Mr. Garrick," Ambrose said, not looking up, "you have 30 seconds to explain to this court why I should not refer you to the California State Bar for suborning perjury, and another 30 seconds to explain why you should not be held in contempt." Garrick, previously a portrait of immaculate corporate aggression, now looked like a man standing on the deck of a sinking ship. He scrambled to his feet, knocking his heavy leather briefcase against the table. "Your Honor, I swear on my license, I was completely blind to this. My firm conducted a standard forensic sweep of Mr. Evander's domestic accounts. He swore to us, in writing, under penalty of perjury, that the Auratech collapse had wiped him out. We had no knowledge of offshore entities, nor of this YouTube persona. Ignorance is a defense for the naive, counselor, not for a partner at Stratton, Vane and Croft," Ambrose countered coldly. "However, given the sophisticated nature of the cryptographic concealment Mr. Vance just outlined, I will temporarily reserve judgment on your complicity. But your client is another matter entirely." Ambrose finally looked at Evander. The former tech mogul was completely shattered. The arrogant smirk that had defined his features for the last 5 years had melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked small, pathetic, and entirely stripped of the illusions that had protected him. "Evander!" Ambrose's voice boomed, resonating with absolute authority. "You sat in my courtroom, swore an oath on a Bible, and presented hundreds of pages of falsified financial documents. You attempted to use the judicial system as a weapon to economically starve your wife, all while hoarding $22 million in hidden digital assets. This is not a simple misrepresentation of assets. This is criminal fraud." "Your Honor, please," Evander choked out, his voice a pathetic, reedy whine. "The crypto market is highly volatile. That money could be gone tomorrow. It's not real liquidity." "Do not insult my intelligence," Ambrose snapped. "The court is issuing an immediate emergency freezing order on all known assets tied to your name, the alias Elias Thorne, and the entity Apex Renderings LLC. Furthermore, I am directing the court clerk to forward the unredacted transcripts of today's proceedings, along with Mr. Vance's entire forensic dossier, directly to the SEC's Crypto Assets and Cyber Unit, as well as the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN." Evander gasped, as if he had been physically struck. FinCEN was the death knell. They were the federal watchdog that dismantled international money laundering rings. "Bailiff," Ambrose continued, his gaze unwavering, "take the respondent into custody for direct criminal contempt of court. He will be held without bail pending a full federal review of his financial perjury." "What? No, you can't do this!" Evander shrieked, scrambling backward as the burly bailiff approached with a pair of steel handcuffs. "Garrick, do something! File an injunction!" Garrick did not look at his client. He snapped his briefcase shut, the click echoing sharply in the room. "I am formally withdrawing as counsel for the respondent, Your Honor, effective immediately, citing a total breakdown of the attorney-client privilege due to gross deception." He turned and walked down the aisle, abandoning Evander without a second glance. Evelyn watched in absolute silence as the bailiff grabbed Evander's arms, forcefully pulling them behind his back. The sharp click-click of the handcuffs locking into place was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of reality finally catching up to a man who had outrun it for far too long. "Evelyn, tell them!" Evander pleaded, his voice cracking as he was hauled toward the side door of the courtroom. "We can settle. I'll give you half. I'll give you everything." Evelyn didn't blink. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the legal pad. She looked into the eyes of the man who had gaslit her, betrayed her, and tried to destroy her. "I don't want everything, Evander," Evelyn said softly, her voice carrying across the silent room. "I just wanted the truth." The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind him, cutting off his frantic protests. The silence that followed was different from the oppressive heat that had started the day. It was clean. It was the silence of a slate wiped completely clean. By the time Evelyn walked out of the Los Angeles Superior Court and into the searing, dry heat of the afternoon sun, the internet had already executed Evander. She sat in the passenger seat of Prescott's hybrid sedan, the air conditioning blasting, and opened her phone. She didn't have Twitter, but she didn't need it. The news had permeated every corner of the digital world. The freelance journalist, Sarah Jensen, had published a massive thread detailing the courtroom drama, complete with a leaked audio snippet of Leopold's voice-unmasking presentation. The karma was absolute, and it was devastatingly public. Evander had built the crypto oracle on the premise of being an infallible, anti-establishment genius who was fighting for the little guy. He had weaponized the trust of his audience. Now, that audience was tearing him apart with a ferocity only the internet could muster. Evelyn pulled up YouTube. The top trending video wasn't a music video or a movie trailer. It was a 20-minute emergency upload by CoffeeZilla, the platform's most notorious and respected internet detective, famous for dismantling financial scams. The thumbnail was a split image. On the left, the glowing, geometric mask of the oracle. On the right, a grim, highly unflattering paparazzi photo of Evander from his Auratech bankruptcy days, with the word fraud stamped across his forehead in bold red letters. Today, the biggest god in the crypto space just got unmasked by his own ex-wife in a divorce court. CoffeeZilla's voice rang out from Evelyn's phone speaker. You guys know I've been suspicious of the Oracle for months. The trades were too aggressive, the token sponsorships were shady, but I never guessed it was Evander. Yes, that Evander. The guy who tanked Auratech and left hundreds of employees jobless while claiming he was broke. It turns out he took his wife's savings, washed it through Tornado Cash, and used it to manipulate micro-cap coins, dumping his bags on his own subscribers. Evelyn scrolled through the comments. They were a bloodbath. The millions of people who had idolized the Oracle were expressing a visceral, venomous betrayal. But the real damage was happening in real time on the blockchain. Over on X, formerly Twitter, an on-chain sleuth known as ZachXBT had already mapped out Evander's secret ledger addresses, which Leopold had submitted into the public court record. ZachXBT posted the visual flow of funds, proving unequivocally that Evander had been front-running his own audience. He would buy massive amounts of an obscure, worthless cryptocurrency, hype it up in his Oracle videos, and then sell it all the moment his subscribers drove the price up. The market reaction was instantaneous. Solstice Coin, the token Evander had been pumping in the video shown in court, plummeted by 99% in less than 3 hours. It was a total wipeout. The liquidity pools dried up. The private Discord server, once a premium, gated community, descended into absolute anarchy as moderators fled and users realized they had been paying a subscription fee to a man who was actively robbing them. Evander had spent his entire life curating his image. He had needed to be the smartest man in the room, the untouchable visionary. But the internet does not forgive, and it does not forget. His legacy was permanently cemented. He wasn't a visionary. He was a meme. He was a cautionary tale, a punchline, circulating on Reddit forums and TikTok stitch videos. "Are you watching the fallout?" Prescott asked softly, keeping his eyes on the brutal LA traffic. "It's everywhere," Evelyn murmured, locking her phone screen. He spent his whole life building an audience. Now they're watching him burn. "Karma in the digital age is exceptionally efficient," Prescott noted, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "But more importantly, Evelyn, you did it. You held him accountable." Evelyn leaned her head against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching the dry palm trees blur past. She felt a profound, exhausting sense of relief. She had spent years believing she was crazy, buying into Evander's narrative that she was overly suspicious, that she didn't understand the complex world of high finance. But she had been right all along. She had taken responsibility for her own blindness, forced herself to face the terrifying reality of her marriage, and fought back with the only weapon that mattered, the indisputable truth. 6 months later, the Santa Ana winds were blowing again, carrying the dry, dusty scent of the desert into the San Fernando Valley. Evelyn stood on the porch of a modest, single-story ranch home in Studio City. It wasn't the sprawling, echoing mansion in Calabasas, and it didn't have an infinity pool overlooking the canyon. It had a small garden of drought-resistant succulents, a creaky front gate, and a profound, unshakable sense of peace. It was hers. The legal aftermath had been swift and brutal. The SEC and the DOJ had descended upon Evander's digital empire like vultures upon a carcass. Because the funds had been obtained through wire fraud and market manipulation, the government seized the vast majority of the $22 million. Evander didn't get to keep a dime of his ill-gotten fortune. However, because Leopold had definitively proven that Evander used $400,000 of marital funds to seed his fraudulent enterprise, the court ruled in Evelyn's favor regarding restitution. She didn't walk away a billionaire, and she didn't want to. She walked away with her original stolen savings, heavily compensated with interest and punitive damages from Evander's few remaining legitimate, liquidated assets. It was enough to pay off Leopold's exorbitant but well-earned fees, buy this modest house in cash, and secure a comfortable, quiet future. She walked inside, setting a mug of black coffee on her small kitchen island. She opened her laptop. She didn't check crypto prices, and she didn't look at financial news. She opened an email from Prescott. It contained a link to a local news article and a brief message. Thought you'd want to see the final chapter. Hope the garden is doing well. P. Evelyn clicked the link. The headline was stark. Former tech CEO Evander sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud and perjury. The article detailed his sentencing hearing. Evander had appeared via video link from a federal holding facility. There were no bespoke suits, no silver-tongued defense attorneys, and no arrogant smirks. The article described him as haggard, defeated, and entirely alone. His YouTube channel had been officially terminated by the platform for violating terms of service regarding deceptive practices. His name was synonymous with modern digital grifting. He had tried to leave her with nothing but the ashes of their life. But Evelyn had realized something fundamental in the months since the trial. Ashes were not just the remains of a fire. They were the foundation for new growth. The soil of a burned forest is the most fertile. She closed the laptop, taking a deep breath of the quiet air in her own home. She had taken responsibility for her life. She had refused to be a victim, choosing instead to be the architect of her own justice. She had walked through the fire of Evander's lies, and she had come out on the other side, unburned and unbothered. Evelyn picked up her coffee, walked out to her small, sun-drenched backyard, and finally, for the first time in 5 years, she felt completely, wonderfully safe. If you found yourself holding your breath during Evelyn's incredible fight for the truth, hit that like button right now. This story proves that the truth always leaves a digital footprint, and the most satisfying karma is the kind built on undeniable facts. Evelyn didn't just survive a narcissist's lies. She took profound responsibility for her own life, investigated the reality she was being denied, and used the truth to dismantle a fraudulent empire. Have you ever had to expose a massive lie? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I read every single one. If you want more gripping, grounded stories full of intense drama, high-stakes twists, and real-world justice, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that the truth always comes to light. Until next time, stay sharp and always trust your instincts.